Welcome back to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and this is part 2 of a 4-part series of episodes on how to engage another person's story. In part 1, we looked at the first 2 principles of effective story engagement. And today, we will look at 5 more principles for you to keep in mind when you are engaging someone's story. But before diving in, if the podcast has been helpful to you, I want to invite you to consider supporting it financially. The way you can do that is to go to my website and click on Support the Podcast. There are a couple of options for making a donation. Thank you for considering it. Okay, today, let's start with principle 3. The third principle of engaging someone's story is to use the exquisite instrument that is your body. Your body is going to give you a lot of helpful data that you want to pay attention to when you are listening to someone's story and when you are engaging with someone's story. Your body is a lot smarter than you think it is. Your body has a way of knowing things that your cerebral cortex doesn't know. And the way to access what your body knows is to put yourself into the story. To put yourself into the story. You have to get inside the story. So, for example, if the story is about a 7-year-old girl waiting for her mom to pick her up after school, you need to become a 7-year-old girl sitting on the curb outside of your elementary school. What do you see? You see all the other kids slowly being picked up and leaving. What do you feel as 10 minutes become 20 minutes? What do you hear? You hear less and less chatter of kids, more and more stillness, more and more quiet as you are left sitting there all alone. In other words, you have to become 7 again. How does a 7-year-old experience those sights and sounds? Remember, the girl in the story that you have just listened to is 7. She's not 43. So here's how Dan Allender puts it. He says, as I listen to a story, I let my imagination see what is happening. I don't merely hear words. I let words create scenes and images. It is like reading good fiction. You don't merely read words. You conjure in your mind the hero, how he or she looks, speaks, moves, laughs, and fights. When an action scene arises, you can feel your heart rate increase and your muscles tighten as danger is engaged. Okay, that's Dan Allender. Let me just say one of his sentences again. I don't merely hear words. I let words create scenes and images. As the story engagement unfolds, and you are engaging with the storyteller, the story needs to become like a movie in your mind that you can fast forward and rewind at will. Now, here's the difficulty with this. If you let yourself become a 7-year-old girl sitting on the curb waiting for mom to pick you up, you are likely going to feel things in your body that you may not want to feel. And this is all the more true when the story is one of sexual abuse or physical abuse or verbal abuse. You don't want to feel the terror that a 7-year-old girl or a 10-year-old boy feels as they are being hit by a raging father. But to the degree that you are able to put yourself in the shoes of the boy or girl in the story, to that degree, you will have a felt sense in your body of what the boy or girl in the story was feeling and experiencing. So, principle number 3 of effective story engagement is to use the exquisite instrument that is your body. Let your body give you data about what it feels like for the boy or girl in the story. Next principle, 4. This is a big one. You need to always be monitoring the storyteller's affect. Affect refers to the storyteller's inner bodily experience. Think of affect on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 represents completely numb and shut down, that's low arousal, and 10 represents panic or rage, that's high arousal. So on this 1 to 10 scale, 5 to 6 represents a slight feeling of excitement. You're alert, you're present, you're paying attention. Hopefully you're in the 5 to 6 range right now as you're listening to this podcast. When you are in the 5 to 6 range, your body is regulated. Your nervous system is regulated. You are calm and present. However, when you enter the 8 to 10 range, your body is in a state of high arousal. And this is marked by a flood of emotions such as panic, terror, or rage. One often feels a racing heart, a tightening in the chest or stomach, faster breathing, a sense of jitteriness. Now, conversely, when you enter the 1 to 3 range, when you go down, your body is in a state of low arousal. And this is marked by emotions like shame, a sense of abandonment, or hopeless despair. You often feel numb or shut down. Now, you may have noticed that I skipped the numbers 4 and 7. Those are the sweet spots. Those are the numbers where your brain can change. People can experience genuine healing from even the deepest of wounds. The neurons that compose one's brain can be rewired. However, this rewiring can only occur in a particular emotional environment, namely, one in which the storyteller engages a portion of their story with enough emotional closeness to become somewhat dysregulated, but not too dysregulated. And the term window of tolerance refers to that window from 4 to 7. This is the range of physiological arousal that your brain can tolerate and still be present. You can still be present. These are the spots where you are engaging a portion of your story with enough emotional closeness. You're close enough to the boy or girl in the story that you become somewhat disrupted, but not too disrupted. You are at a 4 when you are telling a particular part of your story and you begin to shut down. You begin to become detached, dissociated, disconnected. Conversely, you are at a 7 when you are telling a particular part of your story and you begin to get anxious or panicky. Now, here's the thing. Nothing of benefit can occur. That is, the brain cannot experience healing when you are on the extremes of either end. Because when you are at 1 to 3 or 8 to 10, you are no longer present. So, you always need to be monitoring the storyteller's affect so that you know when they begin to move down toward 3, shutting down, or up toward 8, panicky, anxious, enraged. Now, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do when someone moves above 8 or below 3? In other words, what are you supposed to do when the storyteller becomes dysregulated in their body? In that moment, you have 2 tasks. Number 1, you have to help them become aware of what is happening in their body. And then, number 2, you have to help them either raise their arousal if they are shutting down or lower their arousal if they are amping up and getting panicky. So you begin by helping them become aware of the sensations in their body. That is, to become aware that they are either shutting down or amping up. And questions that can help with this include stuff like, hey, can we stop and take a moment to check in with your body right now and just see what is happening inside? Or you can say, it seems like you might be starting to feel frantic inside. Or it seems like you might be starting to feel numb and shut down inside. Do you have a sense of what your body is experiencing right now? The goal of these questions is to help the storyteller become curious about their internal bodily sensations. Once they are aware of what they're feeling inside, once they are aware that they are dysregulated, the next step is to help them move back into a regulated state. So if they have begun to dissociate and shut down, that is, go into the 1 to 3 zone, then regulation means moving up to a 4 or a 5. Conversely, if they have begun to get real anxious and panicky, amped up inside, then regulation means moving down to a 7 or 6. Now, the very act of noticing what is happening in their body will go a long way to helping them become regulated. Let me say that again. Just noticing and you helping them notice what they are feeling, the sensations in their body, that's going to go a long way to helping them become more regulated. And in addition, you can consider the following. When someone has become numb or shut down, you can ask them to just take a minute to feel their feet touching the floor. Take a minute to feel the chair pressing against their back. And conversely, when someone has become frantic or panicky, it can be very helpful to ask them to take a minute to just notice their breathing. And after they've noticed it, to begin to breathe a little more slowly, a little more deeply. Here's a really cool thing about story engagement and about how God designed human nervous systems. The human body is designed to be interactively regulated. The human body is designed, it is created to be interactively regulated, i.e., regulated in part by other people. So in other words, if the storyteller is dysregulated, your body, the listener, your body as the listener, as the engager, your body will help regulate them as long as you are regulated, as long as you are grounded and calm. Now why? Why is this? Because nervous systems are affected by other nervous systems around them. All right, contrary to popular opinion, the human body is not a closed system. Oh my gosh, by no means. The human body is a very open system. In other words, it is highly influenced by other human bodies around it. Consider what it feels like for you when you're around a very settled nervous system. Someone else who's very calm, versus what it feels like when you are in the presence of someone who is panicking and frantic and freaking out. The state of the other person's nervous system affects your nervous system. That's the point. So, as the listener, your grounded presence will help interactively regulate the storyteller when and if they become dysregulated. Do not underestimate the power of your attuned and grounded presence. Now, by the same token, if you become dysregulated during the story engagement, the number one thing that you need to do is to self-regulate. Why? Because your dysregulation will affect the storyteller's nervous system, just like your regulation will affect their nervous system. Both regulation and dysregulation are contagious. So sometimes a storyteller will be able to return to their window of tolerance. Sometimes they will be able to get back into that 4 to 7 range. And they will be able to continue processing their story, and you can continue engaging with them. Other times, something has triggered them and the storyteller will not be able to regulate enough to bring them back to that 4 to 7 window. If this happens, you do not want to proceed with story engagement. Stopping is the best option. We don't want people pushing through when they aren't grounded, when they aren't in their window of tolerance. Why? Because their brain cannot heal when they are not present, when they are not regulated. And, in fact, to proceed with engaging their story when they're dysregulated is to risk re-traumatizing them. So going slowly and carefully is always wise. Last point on this principle, it is very important to note that just as healing can't occur when someone is on the extreme ends of the regulation scale, it also can't occur when someone is staying in that 5 to 6 zone. They are not emotionally disrupted enough in that case for their brain to change. In other words, they are not close enough to the story that they are telling. They're not close enough emotionally to the boy or girl in the story. So, principle number 4, one thing you need to always keep in mind is to be monitoring the storyteller's affect. Okay, principle 5. Your right brain matters much more than your left brain when you are engaging someone's story. To say it a little differently, your emotional presence matters more than the words you say. This is so important. You have 2 brains. You have a right brain and a left brain. They do very different things. For our purposes today, let's just say that the words you speak to the storyteller come from your left brain, the words you speak, and the tone of voice and facial expression with which you communicate those words comes from your right brain. The words you speak, left brain, tone of voice, facial expression, right brain. In other words, verbal communication comes from your left brain, and nonverbal communication comes from your right brain. That's an oversimplification, but for now it's helpful. Here's what's crucial to understand. The storyteller is way more interested in your right brain than your left brain. The storyteller is paying far more attention to your nonverbal communication than to the words that are coming out of your mouth. Now, I know this can be hard to wrap our brains around. Why is the storyteller paying more attention to your nonverbal communication? Why are they so tuned in to your facial expression and your tone of voice? Why not put more weight on your words? Because we all know that words can lie, but the face always tells the truth. Non-verbal communication is involuntary and unedited. Facial expression, tone of voice, nonverbal communication, it is involuntary and unedited. What does that mean? Suppose the storyteller has just told you about something that she did sexually that she feels shame about. Okay, that's what she's shared. Her right brain is going to read your face to determine what you think about that sexual thing that she did. Now, you can say something like, you can use words like, hey, I don't think you're a horrible person for doing that. But inside of you, if you really do think she's a bad person for doing that, if you really do think it's shameful, that is going to come across in your non-verbal communication. Why? Because unlike verbal communication, non-verbal communication is involuntary and it is unedited by definition. So her right brain is going to receive the implicit communication from your right brain, which is mediated to her by the 42 muscles in your face and your tone of voice. Facial reactions are involuntary and they're unedited. Words are not. Okay? Words are voluntary and we edit them all the time. You can fake it with your words. If you think that the sexual thing she did is abhorrent, you can voluntarily sculpt your words so that they will not come across as judgmental. But her right brain already knows what you truly think about what she has shared because the right brain can't fake it. So I don't want to say that the words you speak to others are meaningless because that's going way too far, way too far. However, the primary reason that someone is sharing their story with you is because of your non-verbal response to their story. That's what they are interested in. That's what evokes healing. Okay, that's principle 5. Principle 6. You need to remember that there is always a reason for human behavior. Always a reason for human behavior. Human beings are intentional creatures. Now, I'm not going to discuss this principle in detail right now because podcast episodes 113 and 114 are all about the importance of naming intentionality when you engage a story. I am simply going to share an example. Suppose the story that you've just heard shows that the storyteller was always emotionally distant from their father. Principle 6 is that you need to remember that there is a reason for that emotional distance between the storyteller and their father. And that reason is rarely as simple as, well, dad didn't do emotions, or dad was preoccupied with his work and never at home. Most people prefer to think of their stories as stories of neglect. And in this example, the emotional distance between the storyteller and their dad may be due to neglect, but you need to find out for sure. In my experience, neglect is rarely a sufficient explanation. There is almost always a reason for neglect. There is something driving the neglect. If your dad never paid attention to you, the question is, why? Did dad pay attention to your older sister, your older brother, your younger siblings? Okay, well, why didn't he pay attention to you? Your task as a story engager is to make an incoherent narrative coherent. The storyteller might say, I just don't know why my mother was so mean to me. Principle 6 is that there is always a reason that mom was mean to you. And it's never mom was just a mean person. How do I know that? Because the storyteller will have memories of mom being kind to certain people in her life. And so the question is, okay, if mom has the capacity for kindness, why was she so cruel toward you? Principle 6 of story engagement is that human beings are intentional creatures. There is a reason for our behavior. All right, principle 7. Repairing rupture is more important than engaging their story perfectly. There is no way to engage someone's story perfectly. So don't try. There will be times when you miss the storyteller, when you are not attuned to what's happening inside their body. You've just said something and the storyteller is remembering a different story from when they were 5 and they're having big feelings about that second story and you just keep right on trudging in the direction you were going. They're remembering another traumatic story from their life and you don't see the shift on their face. This kind of thing happens all the time. Misattunements happen all the time. A misattunement is not a big deal as long as it is repaired. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to repair? To repair is to acknowledge that you have missed the storyteller in some way, that you're no longer tracking with them, that the two of you are no longer joined and connected, that something happened and they went in one direction internally and you failed to track with them and attune with them. Okay, the first step of repair is simply acknowledging that. Just acknowledging, okay, you have gone somewhere else and I missed you. That's the first step of repair. The second step is to reattune, to find out where they are and join them there. That's the process of reattuning. Now, rarely will a storyteller say to you, look, you're missing me. I started shutting down a minute ago and you're still clueless about it. All right, rarely are they going to tell you that. Why? Why is it uncommon for a storyteller to tell you that you're not attuned to them? Because they have virtually no experience of that process going well. In other words, they have lots of memories of trying to tell their mom and dad, hey, I'm hurting here. Hey, you're missing me. Hey, this does not feel good for me. And no one cares. They've tried to say, hey, I'm not doing well. And no one cares. So why in the world would they take the risk of saying to you, you're missing me right now. You're not attuned to me right now. The more quickly you can recognize that you have misattuned and then begin the process of repair, the better. The more quickly you can begin the process of repair, the better, which means you want to frequently check in with the storyteller to find out what's happening for them internally. When you have lost someone's face, will you go back? Story engagement isn't about being right all the time. It's about being attuned enough to the person's face to know when you might have lost them, and then you just check in with them and you ask them, what's happening for you? Do you feel like I am with you? One of the things that keeps us from being better story engagers, frankly, is cowardice. We are afraid of saying the wrong thing or saying something hurtful. Now, here's a secret to engaging trauma narratives. You are allowed to screw up. You are allowed to misattune. You are allowed to do harm. The issue is, will you repair? When you miss them, or when you hurt them, will you acknowledge it and reattune and repair? Okay, that's the final principle. Now let me recap all 7 principles of story engagement that we've done today. Principle 1, attunement is more important than engaging their story brilliantly. Okay, that was last episode. Principle 2, also from last episode, kindness will take you further than skill. And then from today, principle 3, use the exquisite instrument that is your body. Let your body give you data about what the storyteller is experiencing. Principle 4, always be monitoring the storyteller's affect. Principle 5, your right brain matters much more than your left brain when you're doing this work. Principle 5, remember there is always a reason for human behavior. And principle 7, repairing rupture is more important than engaging their story perfectly. In the next episode, we will look at the tactics of how to engage another person's story. We'll get down in the dirt, ground level, and look at specific tactics that you can use when you're engaging someone's story. Thank you so much for listening today. Remember, if the podcast has been helpful to you, please consider supporting it financially. You can just go to my website, click on support the podcast, and there's some options for making a donation. Thank you for considering it.